We continue now at the top of Daf Yudalid Amid Aleph Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 14a. On the previous summit, the Gemara had a machlokas amoroim, how to understand the machlokas tanoim in the Mishnah. Again, in the Mishnah, the case is a person finds a shtar chov. The question is, do you return that shtar chov to the creditor? And Rabbi Meir says it depends. If it's a shtar with achrayis nechasim, you don't return it to the creditor. If it's a shtar without achrayis nechasim, you do return it to the creditor. The Chachamim said in all situations you do not return it to the creditor. And in any case, the Gemara brought Rebbe Lazar's opinion about how to understand the Mishnah, and the Gemara then brought a brisa which refuted Rebbe Lazar on two of the points that Rebbe Lazar made. But the problem is that it actually said that he's only refuted on one of the points. And so the Gemara asked, why are we saying that Rebbe Lazar is only refuted on one of his points if the brisa seems to be refuting two of his points? And so that's where the Gemara here picks up. The Gemara says chadahu. It's really all one point that's being refuted. Techad tamu, because it's all based on one reason. And here the Gemara again tells us what Rebbe Lazar, how he understood what was going on in the Mishnah. To mishum dekam Rebbe Lazar, because Rebbe Lazar says machlokas b'she'ein chayiv moda. Since Rebbe Lazar understands the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is specifically in a situation where the lova does not admit that he's chayiv anything. And again, if you're going to say that the idea is that the lova is not admitting he's chayiv anything, then the Chachamim make perfect sense. Why should you return to the creditor if the lova is not admitting that he's chayiv? So the question then is, why, according to Rebbe Lazar, if it's a shtar without achrayis nechasim, do you return to the creditor? Can't you still use that shtar to collect from the lova incorrectly, improperly? And so that's why Rebbe Lazar said a shtar without achrayis nechasim can't be used at all anyway, so that's why you return to the creditor. So because Rebbe Lazar says the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim is b'she'ein chayiv moda, hu mitar etzachi, that's why he went on to say what he said, as Rashi will now explain. Umeshani chadahu dechat time. It's all one reason, meaning tam echad his kikul Rebbe Lazar lomer. It was all one reason that forced Rebbe Lazar to say as shtei in both points. To mishum dekamer machlokas to masnisim b'she'ein chayiv moda. Because of the fact that Rebbe Lazar understands the machlokas in the Mishnah in a case where the lova does not admit that he's chayiv, huzkuk lomer she'eno gova afilim ibnei chorin. That's why he has to say, according to Rabbi Meir, that such a shtar without achrayis nechasim can't be used at all, even to collect from free property. And so therefore, since Rebbe Lazar then needed to finish his sentence and say avol keshechayiv moda, because Rebbe Lazar goes on to say that in a case where the lova does admit that he's chayiv, divrei hakol yachzir, everybody agrees you return to the creditor. Now, even in a situation where the lova admits that he's chayiv, there still could be a concern. Maybe the creditor and the debtor, meaning maybe the malva and the lova, maybe they're in cahoots. Maybe there's a conspiracy over here to try to get property from the lekuchos. So that's why he needs to say, Keshechayiv moda, everybody agrees you return it to the creditor. Huskak lomar lo chashin l'knunya. That's why Rebbe Lazar had to say that we're not concerned with this kind of a conspiracy, that they're in cahoots with one another. And so that's why really, even though there is a refutation of both of those points, the point about knunya and the point also about the fact that you don't collect even from bnei chorin, according to Rabbi Meir, when you have a shtar without achrayis nechasim, those 2 points are related. That's why it's considered to be all one refutation. And the Gemara continues, Tufta de Shmuel Betarti, the brisa from the previous Amud refutes Shmuel on 2 points. Chaduk Rebbe Lazar, one refutation is the same refutation we find by Rebbe Lazar. The Hamuki Masnisim b'she'ein chayiv moda, because Shmuel also says the Mishnah is talking about a situation where the lova does not admit that he is chayiv, meaning to say again, according to Shmuel, the machlokus between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham in the Mishnah is talking about a scenario where the lova does not admit that he's chayiv, and nevertheless, if it's a shtar that has no achrayis nechasim, you do return to the creditor. The brisa did not say that. The brisa said that if the lova does not admit that he's chayiv, you never give the shtar to the creditor. And the other refutation of Shmuel is regarding another statement of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, and this was brought previously, Matzah shtar hakna b'shuk. Shmuel holds that if a person finds a shtar hakna in the shuk, again a shtar hakna is a shtar where the lova is obligating himself regardless of whether there's a loan or not. Even if he eventually does not borrow, he's still obligated because he wrote up the shtar. That's a shtar hakna. So Shmuel says there's no real concern over there because the lova is certainly obligated. So yachzer lebailim, so you return that to the owner, you return that to the creditor. V'lo chayshinon lepiron. And the point of Shmuel, the chiddush of Shmuel, is we're not concerned that maybe the lova, of course the lova was obligated, but maybe he already paid it off. Shmuel is not concerned with that because Shmuel says the shtar would have been ripped immediately. It would have been torn up immediately if it was paid off. So this brisa that we brought in the previous summer is a refutation of that point. To Yufta, it's a refutation of that from the brisa. Why? To Katani Hacha, because what does it say over here in the brisa, talking within the sheet of Rabbi Meir? It says, Afa pisha shnei hamodim, even though both parties admit, meaning the malva, the lova, everybody admits that the lova owes the malva the money, lo yachzer lo lazeh v'lo lazeh, you shouldn't return the shtar to either party. And the reason for that is, Alma, we see chayshinan lepiron, that in such a situation, we are afraid that maybe it was already paid off. In that situation, there's a concern. Maybe the lova is admitting that he's chayiv, but really he already paid it off, and this is just a way to try to collect from the lekuchos, talking about a shtar with achrayis nechasim. So there is such a concern, according according to the Brisa. So v'chol shekein hacha. So according to that, certainly over here, the lomo de lova, meaning in Shmuel's case where the lova is not admitting. Let's say you have a situation of matzah shtar hakna b'shuk. So you have a shtar hakna. It's certainly a shtar that's going to obligate the lova, and the lova does not admit that he's chayiv anything. So certainly the chayshin lepiron. Certainly according to the Brisa in that case, we would be chayshin lepiron, but Shmuel says we're not. We have no concern for piron, so it's a refutation of what Shmuel is saying in terms of shtar hakna. And Rashi explains shtar hakna deleka lamemar kasav lalavos v'lo lava. The point of a shtar hakna is you can't say that you wrote it up to borrow and there was no loan, so maybe he's not obligated. To afilu lo lava shibud nafshe, because when it comes to a shtar hakna, even if there was no loan, even if he borrowed nothing, he's already been meshabed himself. He already owes the money. V'lo chayshinan lepiron, and again, according to Shmuel, we're not concerned that it was already paid off, and that's afilu ein chayiv moda. What Shmuel is saying is even if the lova says he's not really chayiv, the lova is denying any chayiv, but still we say the lova is chayiv over here. You return the shtar to the creditor. Dim isa depari, because what Shmuel says is if it's true that he really paid it off, mikra hava karle, he would have torn it up immediately. But again, over here in the Brisa it says, even though both parties admit, even in a situation where the lova is saying that he does owe the money, still we say over here, maybe there's some kind of conspiracy, maybe they're in cahoots with one another, maybe it really was paid off. That's what the Brisa says when you're talking about a shtar with achrayis nechasim. And according to the Brisa, that would certainly be true if the lova does not admit. And then Rashi points out, well, why isn't this a question on Rebbe Lazar? Now this point is not a problem for Rebbe Lazar, because the Hu Amar b'she'ein chayiv moda lo yachzer shum shtar haroi ligvos, because Rebbe Lazar would admit that if you have a situation where the lova is not admitting to being chayiv, you shouldn't return a shtar which you could in theory use to collect with. The only reason Rebbe Lazar was saying you can return the shtar was because the Rebbe Lazar was saying the shtar was without achrayis nechasim can't be used whatsoever, so you can return to the creditor because it's a useless shtar. But if it wasn't a useless shtar, so then that actually would be a problem. That's the idea. Rebbe Lazar would actually admit to that, meaning to say again, Rebbe Lazar would say that if you had a situation where the lova did not admit that he's chayiv, you should not return any shtar which in theory could be used to collect with, to hide the kamar Rabbi Meir yachzir mishum delab bar gaviyahu, because according to Rebbe Lazar's interpretation, the only reason Rabbi Meir said to return a shtar she'ein bo achrayis nechasim is because it's a useless shtar, it can't be used to collect with. And the Gemara continues, Amar Shmuel, Shmuel says, My taimayu de Rabbanan, what's the reason of the Rabbanan? And Rashi explains, My taimayu de Rabbanan, what's the reason of the Rabbanan? The Amri, that the Rabbanan say, Ki ein bo achrayis nechasim, even if you have a shtar with no achrayis nechasim, gova af min ha-mishubadim, you collect even from the chasim mishubadim. This was within Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the machlokus. Rabbi Yochanan's understanding of the machlokus was that if the lova denies that he's chayiv, everyone would agree. Rabbi Meir and the chacham would agree that you don't return the shtar to the creditor, and the whole machlokus is when the lova does admit that he is chayiv, and in such a situation, if the lova admits that he's chayiv, still the Rabbanan say you don't return any shtar. It doesn't matter if it's a shtar with achrayis nechasim, without achrayis nechasim, you don't return it to the creditor, because we assume that there's some kind of conspiracy going on, and really the lova is just saying that he's chayiv because he wants the shtar to be returned so that they can get the property from the lekuchos, from the buyers, and that means to say it doesn't matter what kind of shtar it is. Even if it's a shtar without achrayis nechasim, you're still able to collect from the lekuchos. You're able to collect from the chasim mishubadim. So what's the reason for that? If you have a shtar that you didn't even write into the shtar to collect from the chasim mishubadim, why is it that you're able to use that shtar to collect from the chasim mishubadim? That's the question of the Gemara. That's the question of Shmuel. And Shmuel explains that the Rabbanan Savri, they hold achrayis to sofru, that the achrayis, the fact that it was left out of the shtar, is just a mistake of the scribe. It is assumed that if you have a shtar, there is going to be a shibud nechasim, you're going to be able to collect from the property that has a lien. And Rashi explains achrayis to sofer, achrayis is a to sofer, meaning kishe'eno kaseh b'shtar sofer ushata. If you didn't write in the achrayis into the shtar, that's just a mistake of the scribe. Avol zeh lo lo v'lo ma'osa below achrayis nechasim. Nobody would lend money without achrayis nechasim. It's not going to happen. To lo shadi inish zuzi b'chti. Nobody's just throwing away their money. So therefore, it's assumed if there was a loan over here, obviously there was a lien on the property. Doesn't matter if it's written into the shtar or not. You are able to collect from the chasim mishubadim. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava bar Isi le Ravidi bar Avin. Rava bar Isi says to Ravidi bar Avin, Umi Amar Shmuel hachi. Does Shmuel really say that achrayis is toh sofer? V'Amar Shmuel, but Shmuel said, Shevach, Shefar, v'Shibud, tzorach li molech. When it comes to Shevach, Shvar, and Shibud, you need to decide. Rashi here explains, Shevach, Shvar, v'Shibud, tzorach li molech. Ha-sofer tzorach li molech b'mocher sadil chavero. The sofer means to say the scribe, he needs to consult a person who's selling a field to his friend, lishal him, and he has to ask him, Im yekabel olav lichto b'shtar ha'mechira, when let's say you have a sale, you're selling a piece of land from the mocher to the lokeach, from the seller to the buyer, so he has to ask the seller, Im yekabel olav lichto b'shtar ha'mechira shu shibed lo nechasav l'mechira zu. Number one, he has to ask him, are you going to be meshabed your property to take responsibility for the sale? Let's say it turns out that the property gets taken away from the buyer. How much responsibility is the seller taking? For example, let's say the creditor of the seller comes along and collects that field from the lokeach. So now are you saying that the purchaser, the buyer, is able to collect back his principal, meaning he lost out the property that he initially bought, plus any improvements that he made, lefnei tirfa, before it was taken from him, mishafar idish ben chasim, that's the word shvar, from the very best of your property. He has to ask that to the seller. And if he doesn't ask the seller, if he doesn't consult the seller, he shouldn't write that into the shtar. Number one, there are some sellers, they're not taking responsibility for what they're selling. And furthermore, even let's say you have a seller that takes responsibility for what is being sold, the principal, he's not necessarily taking responsibility for improvements that happen. And even if he accepts responsibility for both of the karen and the shevach, maybe he's not accepting that the buyer should be able to take from the very best of his property. Maybe it's just from the average property. So what's the point over here? When you have a sale, the scribe has to consult the seller in terms of all levels of responsibility that the seller is taking. So al-malavto sofer, don't you see from that statement of Shmuel that it's not a mistake of the scribe if you leave out achrayis? Maybe he consulted him and he said, I don't want to take that level of responsibility. So how can Shmuel say that we just assume, even though achrayis is not written in there, we just assume it's a mistake, it's a scribal error, and really achrayis was taken? And the Gemara continues, Lema man damar halo amar ha. Should we say that the Amora that quoted Shmuel that achrayis is a toh sofer will not agree with the Amora that's quoting Shmuel about shvach, shvar, v'shibud? Maybe these are contradictory statements. And the Gemara says, Lokash is not difficult. Kan b'shtar halva. The difference is as follows. There's different kinds of shtaros. In one case, we're talking about a shtar that's a loan document. The lo yoev inish zuzi b'chdi. Nobody just gives away his money for nothing. You're not going to lend your money without having some kind of lien on the property of the buyer. There we assume it's a scribal error. We assume most certainly in a case where a person is lending money, there's going to be a lien, achrayis is to sofer, and there's a shibud nechasim. But kan b'mekach umemkar. But the other case, we're talking about buyers and sellers. When you're talking about buyers and sellers, it is very possible that the seller is going to sell the property to the buyer and not take any level of responsibility. It's very possible that a person will buy land just for the day he's able to use the land, meaning the buyer, maybe he does understand that he's buying this property and the seller is not taking that responsibility, and a buyer will be willing to do that. That's something that a buyer will be willing to do because he can gain from the land while he has that land. And Rashi explains, Lema man do amar hamishmei de Shmuel amar ha. Maybe there was one statement in the name of Shmuel by one Amora and a different statement by another Amora. V'amoroi ninu alib de Shmuel. Maybe there's a machlokas Amorim, what exactly Shmuel said. And then the Gemara made a distinction between different kinds of documents. B'shtari halva, when you're talking about loan documents, so then toh sofer, then it is a scribal error. Came in the lo achel peiros v'lo mishani midi, because over there he's not getting any fruits. Meaning to say, in such a situation where you have a person who's lending money to a borrower, the lender is getting nothing from the money he's giving. He's not getting any fruits, no benefit. Lo shadi zuzi bichdi. He's not throwing away his money for nothing. Lo uzfe below achrayis. You think he's lending his money without any responsibility on the side of the borrower. Now this borrower will sell all his property, and when the malva wants to collect, he won't be able to collect. Of course, he's not going to allow that. He wants there to be a lien on the property. However, when it comes to a buyer who's giving money, so avidish, the zavanara, liyoma, sometimes a person will purchase land even for a day, meaning l'safek yomecha, just that'll happen maybe just one day. Shema lo yitrafu mimenu, because they're already, maybe it won't get taken away from him. And even if it does get taken away, Shema luzman meruba, maybe the land will get taken away a long time from now. In the meantime, he'll be able to get a lot of produce, a lot of fruits from this land, and so therefore there's a real distinction between, again, a loan document and a document of sale. And the Gemara continues, Ki ahi de avua bar ihi, it's like the story of Avua bar ihi, Zavin Elisa me'achsa, he bought a loft from his sister, Asa balchov tar from Inei, then her creditor came and took away the loft from him. So Asa lakami demar Shmuel, he came before Shmuel. Amar lei said to him, Kasvalach achrayis, did she write for you, did she take responsibility on the sale? Amar lei lo, he said to him, no, she didn't take any responsibility. Amar lei said to him, Imkain, if so, zil shalma, go in peace, there's nothing we can really do over here. She took no responsibility on the sale. Amar lei said back to him, V'amar hu damar achrayis soferu, but didn't the master say that achrayas, a lack of that written in the shtar, is a scribal error? And so Amar Lei said to him, Hanimili Bishtari Halva. Again, that's only true by loan documents. Aval Bishtari Mekachu Memkar, when it comes to documents of sale, lo, no, that doesn't apply. The Ovid Inish, the Zavan Arli Yomi, because it does happen that people will buy a piece of property, a piece of land, just for the day. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya says, Ruvain Shemachar Sada L'Shimon B'Achrayas. Let's say Ruvain sells the field to Shimon, and there is Achrayas over here. Ruvain takes responsibility on the field. Uva Balchov de Ruvain v'Katarif Le'Minei, and then the creditor of Ruvain comes and takes away the field from Shimon. Dinahu Da'azal Ruvain u'Mishtai Dina Bahadei. The halach is that Ruvain is allowed to go and he's allowed to be involved in this court case against the creditor. V'lo Motzi Amar Le'Lav Bal Devarim Didiyat. The creditor can't say, you're not really the litigant against me. I took away the property. It wasn't from you. I took away the property from Shimon, so Shimon has to deal with me, not you. That's not true. He can't say La Bal Devarim Didiyat. He can't say you're not involved over here. Diamar Le, because Ruvain can say to the creditor, the Mifkas Minei Olai Didi Hadr, that which is taken, he's going to come and he's going to come back to me to reimburse him, meaning to say Ruvain sold the field to Shimon, and now that field got taken away by the creditor of Ruvain, so Ruvain can say to the creditor, I want to deal with you because I know that Shimon's going to come to me, he's going to want to get paid back because of what just happened. And the Gemara says further, Ika Diamri, there are those that say, Afilu Shalo Be'achrayas Nami, even if it's a situation where Ruvain took no responsibility on the sale. In other words, Ruvain sold to Shimon this property. He took no responsibility whatsoever. Now Ruvain's creditor comes along and takes the property away from Shimon. So maybe in that situation, the creditor can say to Ruvain, you have nothing to do with this case. You took no responsibility on the sale, and now I'm coming along taking it away from Shimon. What do you have to do with this? This is Shimon's problem. No, it's Ruvain's problem also. Because Ruvain can say to the creditor, Lo nichali de lahavi l'Shimon tarumas alei. I don't want Shimon to have a complaint against me, therefore I'm allowed to be involved in this case as well. And Rashi explains, B'achrayas, again, Ruvain sold it with achrayas, and yitrafu mimenu yishalim lo, meaning Ruvain said, if it gets taken away from you, I'll pay you back. So l'shtuya dina b'hadei de bal chov, so Ruvain's allowed to take the creditor to court. U'lesalko me'al Shimon, meaning he's allowed to bring evidence in order to make it that the creditor doesn't take the property from Shimon. B'chol taina sheyuchalitin, with any claims he could make. V'lomar particha kach v'kach, he could say, I already paid you. O kach v'kach yesh li lecha tzviya, v'ani ma'akev chov zeh tachtav, or I had a counterclaim against you, that's why you're not allowed to take it. V'lomatzi bal chov l'meimar lei, and the creditor can't say La Bal Devarim Didiyat, you're not involved. B'davar zeh karka Shimon ani notel, you're not involved. I'm taking the land of Shimon. And if you have a claim against me, it's a separate claim. Take me to court. And so that's not true, because Ruvain can say Demifkas Minei Olai Hadar Masha Tomotzi MiShimon Yachzer Olai. Whatever you take from Shimon, that's going to come back to me because I took achrayas. But then the Gemara went on to say there's another version. Even if Ruvain didn't take achrayas, he's allowed to be involved because he doesn't want Shimon to have a complaint against him. And the Gemara continues, V'Yomer Abai, and Abai says, Ruvain Shamachar Sada L'Shimon Shalo B'Achrayas. Let's say Ruvain sells a field to Shimon, and he doesn't take any achrayas, he takes no responsibility. V'Yatzu Allah Asikin, and then there are Asikin, as Rashi says, Asikin is Orin. People start protesting. They say, Ruvain can't sell this field to Shimon. There's some reason, whatever the reason is, why Ruvain is not able to sell this field to Shimon. It's not Ruvain's field, etc. So now Shimon wants to back out of this deal. He doesn't want to buy this field. He's afraid it's going to be taken away. So Adshalo Hechzik Bo, so if he hasn't yet made a chazaka on the field, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yodalid Amid Beis.